Welcome. I'm Tracy Smith, and this is Here Comes the Sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. As the winningest contestant in game show history, Ken Jennings already knew the ins and outs of Jeopardy when he took on hosting duties in 2021. But even now, a few years into the job, his legendary predecessor, Alex Trebek, still guides him, as he told Luke Burbank.
Jennings will admit to one possible advantage he might have in the job: his empathy for players, because he's been there himself. Still, Alex Trebek looms large.
If I was ever at sea, I would just think, what would Alex do here? And often it was to do less. He had this amazing minimalist kind of light touch where he never wanted the focus to be on himself, which is such an unusual, beautiful thing in show business. I kind of feel like even now I want to be Alex Trebek when I grow up, because nobody's ever going to do that job as well as he did it.
Later in the show, Ken Jennings on becoming the face of the beloved quiz show.
When you're on a flight now, is it much more likely that you will get recognized as the host of Jeopardy than you would have as the guy who's really good at Jeopardy?
There's been a real uptick. The thing I noticed that I thought would never change is people have actually started saying stuff like, "I'll take dumb political moves for $500, Ken," because I thought that would be, "I'll take dumb political moves for $500, Alex, for the rest of our lives." And it usually is. But occasionally I'll hear, Ken Jennings, and I'll think, that's really weird to go from being, just kind of a fun part of Jeopardy, a little onlooker, a single Lego in the Jeopardy universe, to suddenly becoming the face of it.
Then, artist Stanley Whitney's brightly colored abstract paintings are the subject of a retrospective at the Buffalo AKG Art Museum. Contributor Alina Cho got a tour of the exhibit with Whitney and curator Kathleen Chaffee.
This painting I thought was a failure.
Really?
Yeah, I put it in storage. I never showed it.
Many of these works have never been shown in public.
What do you say to the viewer who might look at these paintings and say, they all look the same to me?
I would ask them if the colors remind them of anything. There might be a yellow that reminds you of a blouse your mother had. It's a way in and a way to spend time with them. And it takes you out of your everyday life and gives you a chance to occupy a different kind of space.
That's all coming up right here on Here Comes the Sun. Ken Jennings was living a quiet life as a computer programmer, husband, and father when he took the test that would change his life, the Jeopardy contest test. The rest, as they say, is history. Luke Burbank led a Q&A about how Jennings went from an average guy in Utah to Jeopardy champion and host.
The category is Famous Jennings. After being expelled from Jamaica in 1716, this privateer became the unofficial governor of the pirate republic of Nassau.
Oh, I don't know this. It's one of my pirate forefathers named Jennings.
Ken Jennings might not know his trivia quite like he used to.
This is the ravages of time we're witnessing.
Yeah, this is like watching me turn to dust and blow away in a chill wind.
Ken Jennings, you are the champion, the greatest of all time.
But that's okay if he's a little rusty, because these days Jennings gets to see all the answers long before he heads out on stage as the now host of his favorite TV show ever.
It's kind of the plot of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I guess. A retiring leader of a franchise takes, 5 little boys and girls to see which one of them really loves his chocolate the most. And I was the one that didn't get sucked up the pipe or whatever.
Alex Trebek.
His Wonka, longtime and legendary host Alex Trebek, who guided the show for decades.
Jeopardy.
A show that turns 60 this year. As a young Mormon kid living in Korea, Jennings says watching armed forces television was his favorite way to pass the time. And his favorite thing to watch? Game shows, of course.
I think it was just actually the gameplay itself. It was a version of the world with well-defined rules, where you could watch a few of them and understand the format. And as a kid, dealing with a confusing world, on game shows are different. Questions get answered almost immediately. For a right answer, there's a nice little ping. For a wrong answer, there's an immediate buzz. It's not like life, which is messy. Game shows are neat and fun and easy.
In college, instead of following his dreams of writing, he opted to become what he calls a bad computer programmer, figuring it was the safe choice. He married his sweetheart, Mindy, started a family, and thought that's how his life would go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Trebek, and welcome to the Jeopardy contestant exam.
When, on a whim, he took the Jeopardy contestant exam.
When I got the call a year later saying, hey, we'd like to have you on in 3 weeks, I freaked out. I started watching the show very intensely, standing up behind my lazy boy at home, pretending it was a podium, mashing my thumb up and down on a Fisher-Price plastic toy I'd stolen from our 18-month-old, just pretending it was a buzzer. My wife would keep score and tell me how I was doing. It was kind of a rocky training montage.
A software engineer from Salt Lake City, Utah, Ken Jennings.
To this day, Jennings says nothing compares to the nerves he felt under the lights and on camera that first time he stepped on stage as a contestant. But then, something amazing happened.
In that first game, I found that years of listening to the clipped rhythms of Alex Trebek really did help. Watching the show, standing up with my fake buzzer helped. I kind of had the timing right away.
Julia.
What is New Zealand?
Good.
In that first game, the score was close, and it all came down to Final Jeopardy.
And I remember Alex accepting my response. It was about the Sydney Olympics. Who is Marion Jones? And I had just written down, who is Jones? And Alex pauses for a second ooh, is that enough? Is he just guessing a last name? And so Alex looks to the judges and he gets the high sign and he says, that's correct. And I realize I'm going to be a Jeopardy champion for the rest of my life. And it was just an immediate rush of euphoria that's hard to explain. As good as the birth of my kids. I can say that now that they're teens and out of the house. It was just an amazing moment. Alex would just wait, and if they didn't know it, he would be like, nope, boop, 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 boop. Oh.
That microsecond decision led to 74 straight victories, $2.5 million, game show immortality, and eventually, and improbably, the job of Jeopardy host.
So I am standing at, you might even say, an altar of sorts that many of us trivia nerds have thought about a lot.
This is the light pen, the telestrator, where you can write down your name and your final Jeopardy response.
Why does it seem that so many highly intelligent people have such questionable handwriting on this show? Is it something to do with the device?
The pen got better. This is much nicer than the version I was trying to write with, which I think had a cord back in 2004. It's funny, I'm getting flashbacks just by being here. It's almost like there are two Jeopardy sets for me. There was this one back here, and there's just a chasm between you and Alex.
Jennings will admit to one possible advantage he might have in the job, his empathy for players, because he's been there himself. Still, Alex Trebek looms large.
If I was ever at sea, I would just think, what would Alex do here? And often it was to do less. He had this amazing minimalist kind of light touch where he never wanted the focus to be on himself, which is such an unusual, beautiful thing in show business. I kind of feel like even now I want to be Alex Trebek when I grow up, because nobody's ever going to do that job as well as he did it.
Which brings us back to our game, and a mistake I made earlier, which the judges caught. At the top of our story, I said they give Jennings the answers before the game, but of course, that's incorrect. They give him the questions. So where exactly did that come from? Well, from Jeopardy creator Merv Griffin's then-wife, Julianne, the story goes.
Yeah, so Merv and Julianne are on a plane coming back from vacation, and he's trying to come up with game show ideas. And she says, well, just do one of those quiz shows like they used to have. And he said, honey, we can't do those anymore. Those were all crooked. They were giving the players the answers. And she thinks about it, and she says, well, that's what you should do. You should just give them the answer, and they'll come up with the question. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, 5,280 feet. And he says, what is a mile? And that's the birth of Jeopardy right there.
The birth of a TV quiz show. But more importantly, says Jennings, the birth of something that in a small way has helped hold us Americans together, at least for 30 minutes a night. And there's nothing trivial about that.
The great and the odd thing about Jeopardy is it's kind of universally popular. Old people like Jeopardy, young people like Jeopardy, red states, blue states. It's bizarrely universal. America still agrees that there's a half hour every day where facts do matter, and we are allowed to adjudicate things as right or wrong, actually based on science and history. And I do think that's an important bulwark.
Up next, an exclusive excerpt from Luke Burbank's chat with Ken Jennings, something you can only see right here on Here Comes the Sun. Stay with us.
I mean, it's a shock and it's an adjustment, but it's such a pleasant one because the show always meant so much to me.
As promised, here's more from Luke Burbank's interview with Ken Jennings.
How big of a part of your life now as the host of Jeopardy is people coming up to you and asking you, or giving you answers in the form of a question? Is that a constant thing for you now?
People do enjoy that. I feel like as a contestant on the show, I would get people coming up to me on the street with very hard trivia questions. So there'd always be some young gunfighter that wanted to stump me. But now it's much more nitpicking. It's kind of letters to the editor about Jeopardy. Dear Ken, you need to look more into the actual Canadian pronunciation of this. Or why do you always say that's him instead of that's he? My second grade teacher. So this is now my life, being corrected by millions of Jeopardy viewers, and it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, how have you figured out how to sort of appease people who have thoughts and comments and requests like that?
I mean, you just have to understand what Jeopardy means to its audience. It's really a very flattering thing. There's not a lot of shows that get that kind of attention because it's not even a quiz show anymore. It's a cultural institution. It's Jeopardy. It's almost like it's a public utility. Your house has to be hooked up to water and gas and Jeopardy every night at 7 o'clock or, mom's going to freak out. And we know it means a lot in the lives of our viewers. It's part of the rhythm of their day. And we want to honor the legacy of the show and also kind of the sense of familiarity and ritual that they get out of it.
Who are the kinds of folks that come up to you in the airport or walking down the street? Like, who's a typical Jeopardy viewer?
There's really no stereotype. It'll be yesterday on my flight, the flight attendant kind of shyly at the end is like, I'm a big fan of Jeopardy. My mom loves you, But I'll also be just walking across the street in New York and somebody will be like, hey, Jeopardy! You realize that it's one of the last things in our culture that's monolithic, that everybody watches, before things got divided into these little niches and silos. It's still a cultural reference we all have.
When you're on a flight now, is it much more likely that you will get recognized as the host of Jeopardy than you would have as the guy who's really good at Jeopardy?
There's been a real uptick. The thing I noticed that I thought would never change is people have actually started saying stuff like, I'll take dumb political moves for $500, Ken. Because I thought that would be, I'll take dumb political moves for $500, Alex, for the rest of our lives. And it usually is. But occasionally I'll hear, Ken Jennings, and I'll think, that's really weird to go from being, just kind of a fun part of Jeopardy, a little onlooker, a single Lego in the Jeopardy universe, to suddenly becoming the face of it. It's a shock and it's an adjustment, but it's such a pleasant one because the show always meant so much to me.
Is there a real intentional kind of behind the scenes effort to make sure that this show stays essentially apolitical?
Yeah. In particular, that meant a lot to Alex Trebek, I think. The idea that, one of the reasons why he was kind of a bit of a cipher for many years is because he enjoyed the fact that he was not associated with any particular ideology. He was the face of Jeopardy, the face of these faintly old-fashioned virtues of knowledge and cultural literacy and fair play, and nobody was troubled with how he voted or which cable channel he watched. And that's just hard to recapture today. That was what made Alex, one of the many things that made him hard to replace is, we now know what people think about the country.
How do you practice for your first time out hosting? Did they run you through a bunch of kind of mock games and stuff?
There actually was some dress rehearsal. They had the writers of the show pretend to be contestants, and they would start out being well-mannered contestants so that I could just kind of get into the rhythm of it. And then they would start to push the envelope a little and do subtly wrong things to try to see if I would do the right thing. Because the host of Jeopardy has to wear a lot of hats at once. You're trying to be a perfect narrator for the show and a genial face of it, but you're also a referee adjudicating the game. You're trying to shape the pace of it a bit like an orchestra conductor. You're trying to frame it, the story of the game, the accounts of the game for a home audience as if you're a play-by-play announcer. You're trying to do all these things at once, and Alex made it look easy. So I kind of assumed, yeah, you just have to do what Alex did. But it turns out he was just incredibly able and smooth and graceful at a very hard job.
Does it still feel kind of unreal to you at times?
Almost every day. Like I never want it to become old hat, because I still remember that sense of awe of walking on that stage for the first time and thinking, this is Jeopardy. I've been watching this at home for 20 years, and now I get to be part of it for a minute. And you know, when I hear Johnny say my name, that's hallucinatory, by the way, to hear Johnny Gilbert. You still expect to hear Alex Trebek. Every day I expect to hear him say, the host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek, but he says my name and I have to walk out there. And I guess largely it's an honor, you know, because the history of the show means a lot to me, and I know firsthand from talking to viewers how much it means to them. I can't just be a Jeopardy kibitzer on the sidelines, you know. I really want the show to succeed, and I really want it to have the same profile it had during Alex's years, and I take that very seriously.
Up next, art that's anything but square. Welcome back. Abstract artist Stanley Whitney has been painting for more than 50 years. At 78, he's finally getting his first major retrospective after struggling for years to connect with audiences. Here's contributor Alina Cho.
You can be certain that a morning at Stanley Whitney's studio will involve three things: an abundance of color, a familiar Miles Davis tune, and a deliberately ferocious brushstroke.
For you, that first mark is the top left corner.
Yeah, it is still.
Why? Why there?
It feels good to me. I don't know why. I don't, you know, you don't really worry about why. Why doesn't exist, or even how. It just is.
The works that made Whitney famous are these colorful canvases, 4 horizontal rows of varying hues. But don't call it a grid, or worse, a formula.
Describe it to me.
Color.
But the structure.
Color. It's about rhythm, it's about space, so people can think clear or feel clear.
Whitney grew up in a small black community outside Philadelphia. From a young age, it was clear he was interested in art.
You know, my first devastation was going to first grade and realized I couldn't draw anymore. I had to start reading.
Going to art school spared him from the Vietnam War draft. He moved to New York in 1968. Early on, Whitney focused squarely on making art and little else.
The Black Panthers were asking what you're doing for the race. You know, what are you doing? And
They wanted you to join the struggle.
yeah, right. And I wanted to paint.
So he painted and painted, yet struggled to find an audience.
You had a tough time getting a break.
Well, it was race. It was really race.
Fed up, in the early 1990s, he and his wife, painter Marina Adams, moved to Rome. Inspired by the geometry of the Colosseum and the pyramids in Egypt, the abstract artist had a breakthrough.
The stacking of forms, very basic things we think about, ancient monuments and the stacking. There's no space between those massive rocks, those massive blocks of the pyramids.
Kathleen Chaffee is the curator of Stanley Whitney's first major retrospective at Buffalo's AKG Art Museum.
And he sort of felt this freedom looking at that he didn't need to find landscape anymore. He didn't need to have air. He could allow his colored forms to support each other.
She calls Whitney one of America's greatest living painters.
He's 78 years old. He's been painting for more than 50 years. Why is this his first major retrospective?
I think that attention and scholarship on artists of color is still something that's come later than it should have come. And for an artist like Stanley, I think that's definitely been the case.
This painting I thought was a failure.
Really?
Yeah, I put it in storage. I never showed it.
Many of these works have never been shown in public.
What do you say to the viewer who might look at these paintings and say, they all look the same to me?
I would ask them if the colors remind them of anything. There might be a yellow that reminds you of a blouse your mother had. It's a way in and a way to spend time with them. And it takes you out of your everyday life and gives you a chance to occupy a different kind of space.
A look outside the box that Stanley Whitney hopes sparks something inside, too.
What do you hope people will feel when they look at your work?
Better. Much better. Much better.
I'm Tracy Smith. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next time on Here Comes the Sun.